All right, so today's webinar is about whether are you a savings champion or not, and what you can basically do to become one. So this is evidence that we have gathered in our CPO study that we run in. This study basically looked into the effectiveness of procurement at creating savings, and especially looked into the emerging trends in advanced spend levers. Now you might question, what are advanced spend levers and how can you use them to your advantage? Basically, when you are tasked with the challenge to create more savings, you have these sort of 4 levers to your hands. The first one is pay less. This is probably what most of us automatically think of when it's all about creating savings. So we're probably talking about running tender processes, aggregating volumes, or minimizing contract leakage. And really, this is a tried and tested method of reducing spend, and that is done by a lot of organizations, as we'll see later on. We actually found in our study that just focusing on this pay less workhorse is not going to be enough in the future. And we find that organizations who simply focus on pay less are actually missing out on anything up to 122% of savings. So the question is, where will the next wave of procurement savings come from? And now is probably a good time to introduce what we call the 3 advanced spend levers. Look, the first one is to buy cheaper. And it's basically all about managing buyers' behavior to avoid buying premium goods and services. I try to compare that quite often to what you do in the supermarket. You try to go for home brand rather than the fully fledged brand that has all of these marketing overheads as well. The important bit here is that it should still be fit for purpose. So the idea is probably avoiding full-priced airfares. So not getting a flexi fare on the way out and on the way in when we think about the travel category, but probably only a flexi fare would be required on the way back, because the flight out in the morning might be quite, people don't require as much flexibility. So having a cheapest fare of the day approach to the way out is probably a really good way to implement buy cheaper spend lever. The next spend lever that we looked at is to buy smarter. Buy smarter basically means finding new solutions and efficiencies in the way the goods and services are purchased and consumed. What does that mean? Well, it probably means shifting away your focus from a per unit cost to process costs. So think about business cards. If you buy them in really large batches, say 1,000 at a time, obviously the per unit cost is really small. That said, the process cost of when you think about people change jobs all of the time might be quite high, because you're just throwing 900 of them out, and when the job title changes, and therefore the end-to-end cost of that value chain is quite high. So buying smarter is all about finding those process efficiencies in how the good or service is consumed. You could actually also talk about purchase orders, for example. And I don't know how you raise your purchase orders, but I've seen organizations have one purchase order automatically lead to one invoice. And then that means they might raise 30 purchase orders in 1 month. And then they also receive 30 invoices. So getting the grips onto the P2P process here will obviously streamline that. So it's probably only required to have one purchase order that's valid for the whole year, and then 12 invoices invoiced every month to streamline that process of how those back office processes are run. The buy less spend lever, and this is last but not least, is actually talking about reducing the actual consumption of the goods and services. And when we talk about your electricity bill, for example, energy category, the best way to reduce your electricity bill is to not buy any electricity in the first place. So it might be great for you to reduce the per unit cost, so the cost per kilowatt hour from 22 cents to 19 cents per kilowatt hour, but that's great. But how much better would it be if you didn't have that consumption in the first place? Then you would pay $0 or 0 cents for the unit. And this then obviously goes into such tactics as encouraging double-sided printing to reduce the paper consumption, using video conferencing to reduce travel, or attending a webinar rather than a training session, and that would obviously reduce the amount of travel, for example, bought. All right. Now, why do we call the buy cheaper, the buy smarter, and the buy less the advanced spend levers versus the pay less, which is just the workhorse from the past? Well, when you look at those three, really what we see is that they require the procurement team to turn their focus internally. And what that means is you as a procurement officer need to work with your stakeholders in your organization to drive the cost down. So what's the difference? In pay less, you obviously work with the market, and you use your spending power to basically get a better price from your service provider or from your supplier of goods to beat down their per unit costs. But if you want to buy cheaper, buy smarter, and buy less, you actually don't have to talk to the supplier. You can, but the main bulk of work will actually be coming from you talking to your internal stakeholders, because they have to be okay with their change travel policy of just having the best fare of the day for the flight out. They have to be okay with just raising one purchase order and receiving one invoice. And they have to be okay to actually reduce their consumption. Good luck, telling them now you can only print black and white and it has to be double-sided, not color and on the shiny paper. So it is really a different set of skill sets that is required. Whereas with the pay less, that's more of where the procurement team traditional core competencies sit. And we find that a lot of procurement teams focus on the pay less spend lever simply because that's what they've always done. That's what's always easy to do. And the more advanced spend levers require all of these stakeholder engagement skills and so on. And it's also not quite in the control of the procurement team as much, because other people in the organization can just say no, and in the end it's being held against you if you don't create enough savings. So in general, these are the sort of spend levers that we see out there in the market being used, and these are also the ones that we used in our CPO study. Now let me show you a bit of the demography that we had of people responding to our study this year. So the study was open in June this year, and we had 81 respondents, and as you see, more than half were chief procurement officers, and a couple of category managers and procurement managers were in there as well. Importantly, there was a split between industries. So first one is the sort of manufacturing industry, then there was the public sector, and there was the services industry. And we'll see, it's all probably about evenly split between those three industries, but we'll see that the results actually vary quite a lot. So what is the best spend lever will differ from industry to industry. Interestingly enough, those 81 respondents together have combined spend of about $9 billion per year. And by using these four spend levers that I just introduced to you, they saved about $1.3 billion per annum. Now, I think that's quite a strong argument of why this webinar is quite relevant, and to see what other spend levers you could use to drive more savings. And that's probably a good segue into this. So out of those four spend levers that we talked about, which ones do you think are the most effective? And to our big surprise, what we found is that the pay less workhorse won't work going further into the future. So the additional savings from implementing a pay less spend lever are nil. So that means for you to just run another tender process, for you to just accumulate spend across your organization, that will occur hugely diminishing returns. So probably the first time when you put something out to tender, you might save about 20%. Second time, you probably save around 8% per annum. But third time around, you don't have any additional savings that will come from pay less. So where will your next wave of procurement savings come from? Well, it's from these advanced spend levers. So we found our participants in the study saved an additional 13%, and this is especially true for the people working in industry, manufacturing industry, from buying cheaper and buying fit-for-purpose products and services rather than premium goods, they can save an additional 13% per annum. If they implement the Buy Smarter spend lever, the additional savings are 16%. And for organizations, and hang on, this is really interesting, the organizations that implement successfully the Buy Less spend lever, they save an additional 44%. 44% is the additional savings that you can realize if you implement the Buy Less spend lever and reduce consumption of goods and services. Now, as I said before, this will be different in industries and by industry. So it's different for services organizations, different for manufacturing industry, and different for public sector. And we'll look at each of those sectors in just a moment. But before we do that, you would assume that everyone does the Buy Less spend lever, right? Every one of our participants would use the Buy Less spend levers as much as they could, because they want to maximize their savings. Well, let's just see who of you attendees of the webinar today is using these different spend levers and which ones you are using. So I believe, Jade, you have prepared a poll question.
Yes.
And I was hoping that we could bring this one up.
Yes, we have a poll question. What spend levers are you using? The options are Pay Less, Buy Cheaper, and Buy Smarter. So audience, select all that applies and click Submit.
So we'll just give everyone sort of half a minute to fill this in. Yep, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Give you a couple more seconds. Okay. So, got a few more coming in. That looks about right. Okay, 75% of the audience are mainly using Pay Less spend lever, followed by 50% of you using Buy Less and Buy Smarter. Oh, that is one of the. So Pay Less, Buy Less, and Buy Smarter are the most used.
What's with Buy Cheaper? Can you see that as well?
Yes. So 38%.
38% used Buy Cheaper. Okay, excellent.
Obviously, taking into account that our audience might be using more than one of those spend levers.
Excellent. Can you show my screen again, Jade, please?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for participating in that quick poll. It actually quite reflects what we found in our study as well. So let me show what the participants of our study said. So the Pay Less workhorse is used by 83% of our participants. 8 out of 10 procurement organizations rely on the Pay Less spend lever. How does it look like for Buy Cheaper? Mind you, the price here is 13% of additional savings. And we found that about 2/3 of the participants of the study use that spend lever. Buy Smarter. Buy Smarter is used by about half of the participants, and that's pretty similar to what the webinar poll just showed as well. And the Buy Less. So once again, this is the one that has the biggest savings out there at the horizon. Is used by half of the webinar participants, but of the participants in the study, it was only used by 1 in 4. So 3 out of 4 organizations miss out on the most important spend lever, which is Buy Less, and they miss out on those 44% additional savings that they could realize. All right, that's all well and good, but what does it mean for you? So now let's see what is it that you should do as of tomorrow. We have actually looked at a bit deeper into what Buy Less really means, and how we have asked this question in this survey was we gave everyone 3 different options of how the tactics they used, how to implement each spend lever. So for Buy Less, the 3 options were that they have put initiatives into place to reduce the volume and the quantity purchased, that they have gained a better understanding of the consumption patterns which then allowed better planning, or that the service provider has actually helped these organizations to reduce the volume and the quantity purchased. And now, this is what I said before. It actually really differs what industry you're in, which one of those tactics will be the most successful for you. And you see, for those organizations that have implemented initiatives to reduce the volume quantity, that's on the left-hand side of this slide, additional savings in industry were 46%. But hang on a minute, the public sector can actually save twice as much as they are saving at the moment, just by implementing this one tactic to reduce the volume and the quantity purchased. The second tactic, to gain a better understanding of the consumption patterns, which allowed for better planning, basically, especially in the services sector, yielded the biggest savings increases. So services organizations such as banks and financial institutions, but also other professional services, were able to save an additional third by just implementing this one tactic. So just by understanding the consumption patterns better and allowing for better planning, including when, what sort of procurement should be run. All right, so that's for the buy less, spend lever. For the other two spend levers, for buy cheaper and buy smarter, there's also been a couple of tactics that we asked the participants how they use them. Now, for buy cheaper, that third tactic proved to be the most influential. So if organizations reduce the expenditure on nice-to-have features, on add-ons and bespoke sort of implementations, and rather just buying, what is really fit for purpose, in industry and in services, yeah, in services it creates a bit of additional savings, but it's not a whole lot. But in the public sector, again, look at that. Over double the savings can be realized by just honing down on what is really the need of the business, really understanding of what needs to be bought rather than what the business says that they want. So we find quite often the business obviously wants something that's very tailored to them, no commercial off the shelf, ticking all of the boxes. Everyone wants to drive a Ferrari. But it might actually be that a Golf would be the better option because it's still fit for purpose and it doesn't have all of these nice-to-have add-ons and bespoke solutions to it. So the public sector can double their savings just by implementing this one tactic. Buying smarter is the last spend lever, and look, organizations that streamlined how the service is consumed and including reducing of internal costs, such as the processing costs for purchase orders and invoices and so on. Once again, the public sector can double their savings just by focusing on that. Industry can about realize half an additional savings. So if they save at the moment 10%, they can save an additional 5% just by implementing the buy smarter spend lever, or actually that one tactic to streamline how the service is consumed. Now, interestingly enough, our study also found there's additional benefits, non-monetary benefits from buying smarter as well. So we found that organizations are more likely to also get higher quality, quicker delivery, better relationships, a lower supply risk, and higher innovation if they implement the buy smarter spend lever. And quite often how we run this is a workshop with the service providers to really understand where are the process inefficiencies, what is really the business outcome that we want to achieve, and what is the best way to satisfy that need, and how can we streamline the procurement of those services and actually the consumption of the services, not just the procurement, but how those services are being consumed. Now, once again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to just use that question box that we have shown you at the beginning of the webinar, and I'm happy to take all of your questions at the end of this webinar. Let's move on. Now, we saw that there's different organizations that are doing differently well in generating savings. And we talk about savings champions, savings followers, and saving laggards. And we titled the saving champions, so that's the top 33% of organizations by savings realized. So the third of organizations that save the most. And the saving leggeds are the bottom third, so the least amount of savings generated by that bottom third of organizations. And the followers are just the ones in the middle. They're neither champions nor leggeds. So what can we learn from them is the question that we asked ourselves. Well, two things for starters. First of all, champions save on average 27% per annum in their category. Followers on average save 10% per annum in their category. And leggeds only save about 4%. Interestingly enough is that second bubble here for each of those categories is the effort spent. So now you see 3.8 is for champions, 5.0 for followers, and 4.4 for leggeds. Now what does that mean? Well, it means that followers on average applied 5 different tactics of how to generate their savings. So remember, for each spend lever, we gave them 3 different tactics that they might have implemented in order to use that spend lever. So the maximum amount, there's 4 spend levers, there's 3 tactics each, so the maximum amount would be 12. Followers use 5 out of those 12 tactics. Champions use about 4, and leggeds use 4.5. What does that mean? Well, it actually means that followers do a lot, but they don't do it particularly well, whereas champions, they do the least amount of different tactics, but they know exactly which ones work for them the best. So for you to go from being a legged to via a follower, you basically try everything a bit more, and through trial and error, you find out what really works for you, and then you become a champion. This is what this next slide will show us. So leggeds really only use the pay less and the buy smarter spend levers. Followers, on top of that, use a bit of buy less and a bit of buy cheaper. So they use all 4. They mainly use pay less and buy smarter, and every now and again they tap into the buy less and buy cheaper. Champions really use all 4 spend levers to their full potential. And by full potential, they know exactly what tactics of those spend levers work particularly well for their organization, because they have quite a good understanding of what their stakeholders want, what they need, and how that translates into the best procurement process possible. So, leggeds are typically heavily focused on pay less and buy smarter. They have not captured the potential from buy less and buy cheaper. Followers have retained some focus on pay less and buy smarter, so they do less of those tactics, and they have diverted a small amount of their attention to buy less and buy cheaper. If you now want to become a champion, if you're a follower at the moment, then you would balance your effort more equally between all of those 4 spend levers, and you know exactly what works for you well, and you do more of that, what you're already doing well. And Jade, I believe at this stage we have another poll question. Can you bring that up, please?
We do. The question is, do you believe you are a champion, a follower, or a laggard?
So once again, if you could spend a couple of seconds thinking about this, and now how we define the champions, followers, and leggeds, just tick that box, hit submit, and I'll show you how you can find out in probably a bit more structured way. But at this moment, it's just a sort of a gut feeling that we're interested in.
Okay, it looks like everybody's answered, and most of you are followers. And we have a couple of laggards and someone who believes they're a champion.
Okay, well, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Jade. Can I have my screen back, please?
There you go.
Thank you very much. All right, if you want to find out in a more structured way, we have an online benchmarking tool that you may have already seen. What we'll actually do after this session, we'll send you a link to the online benchmarking tool. And you can just key in your numbers and you'll find out where you actually sit, whether you are a champion, whether you're a follower, or if you're a legged. And it should give you a sort of a first indication of where you can improve. It's completely free to use, so please feel free to play around with it a bit. We'll skip this one because we're actually not doing that well for time. I want to leave some time for questions at the end as well. So how can you pull all of this together and come up with a sort of a plan for your individual category? And I've mocked this one up here. It's a case study that we have done for an engineering services category. So professional services are being bought, and you see on this slide in the boxes on the right-hand side how we have addressed each one of those spend levers. So, for example, pay less, we decided to place, and when putting a panel into place, we will ask for a discount based on the volume that each panelist has received per year. So that's that second tick in the aggregate and leverage spend, or the pay less spend lever. In the lower the unit costs, buying cheaper, the second one is actually leveraging engineers who have a deep understanding of off-site construction and modular construction. So the buying cheaper is also related to the sort of the total construction cost, which is much higher than the engineering cost, but it's heavily influenced by the engineering services. So we want to leverage engineers who can help us buy cheaper in the later stages of the project. Lower the demand volume and buying less. In this case, it's all about taking the incentive away from the service provider to charge you more, or actually to work more. So when you think of an engagement based on a times and material basis, for example, you give the service provider all of the incentives to work more, and therefore to increase their revenue by charging you more. Going more towards a fixed fee takes away from that. So you're now incentivizing to do less. And that will then ultimately bring down your cost and implement the buy less spend lever. Buying smarter, for example, here is, it's very tedious to always go through the standard legal terms and conditions for a project. Sometimes it takes longer than the actual delivery of the engineering services. So the process efficiencies we implemented here was around putting a panel into place and pre-agreeing all of those terms and conditions. All right, this slide here summarizes our key findings from our study. So the time is ripe for not just focusing on pay less spend levers, because you would be missing out on up to 122% increase in savings if you did not also turn your focus internally and use those advanced spend levers. At the moment, most organizations that we surveyed use the pay less spend lever, and this is what most of you participants here in the webinar do as well. And only a few organizations, about half in the webinar and up to just a third, use the buy less spend lever in the study. So just by implementing that one buy less tactic alone, especially if you're in the public sector, that's where the next wave of procurement savings will come from. Thank you. That's all that I had. Thank you for your participation today. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. I'm going to hand over to Jade to facilitate that. Thank you.
Yes, you can still submit questions through the question pane in your control panel on the right-hand side. So we've got one question from Lloyd. Lloyd is asking, the CPO is currently focused on consolidating volume, paying less. Work on the cheaper and less are not recognised as procurement results, and smarter does not receive the same recognition as pay less. How do we move from this situation?
Yeah, that is obviously a difficult thing, a difficult bridge to gap. It probably starts as a conversation at a very high level, probably with your CFO around, what are the expectations of our procurement function? Are we just a tick in the box, and are we just there to realize savings, or are we actually there to do more? And is it just procurement savings we're after, or are we actually after process cost reduction? So once again, when we talk about turning the focus internally to implement those advanced spend levers, well, that actually starts with the conversation of, how will we measure our success? And it starts with influencing those decision makers to actually recognize that those are procurement savings as well as just the paying less. There's no golden bullet, no silver bullet for that one, but yes, it is the start of a difficult and long journey.
Okay, Stefan, we have another question from Edward. Edward asks, was there an insight into length of time till savings were realised?
Right. Okay. That's a very interesting question too. So we surveyed procurement professionals here. So mainly they would have not really taken the whole end-to-end contract term into consideration, but mostly savings realized at the signing off the contract rather than what happens afterwards through contract management. And we actually find that about up to 2/3 of the savings then disappear through contract management again as well. So that's difficult. Look, we have asked the participants to quantify the savings they have realized over the last 5 years. So that would probably cover everything a bit. The savings that they have told us were annual savings over the last 5 years within a certain category.
Any other questions? Stefan, we have one from Charlie. His question is, I would have thought procurement has moved past the stage where it is all about savings. We're also here to reduce risk, increase quality. Why do you focus on savings only?
No, that's a good question too. So this is actually the second study that we've run. Last year we ran a study that looked more into what's on the agenda of the CPOs. It's also available for download, by the way, from our website. What they said there is the single most important success factor still for CPOs in 2015, or actually in 2014 that was, is producing savings. And everything else is a nice to have. And I guess that first question that we were just receiving actually talk to that as well. So I'm only being held accountable for how much I save. That's the most important success factor that I have. And until that changes, we thought it's still time to give CPOs the sort of toolkit that they need to address that main challenge that they have. But we saw if you implement the Buy Smarter spend lever, that you can also tick a lot of those other boxes, such as quicker delivery, higher quality, and so on. Right, are there any more questions?
No, I think that's all.
Okay.
If anyone has any other questions, you're welcome to send them through to Stefan. So, Stefan, thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Stop Paying Too Much. Like I said, if you have any other questions, you can contact Stefan at that number or his email address. As you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, so we'd appreciate it if you could complete that and provide your feedback. In the next 24 to 48 hours, you'll also receive an email with a link to view the recording and slides from today, and there'll also be other links to resources such as the 2015 CPO study and the online benchmarking tool. So on behalf of Grosvenor and